Hello and welcome. We're almost there. In this lesson, you'll add logic to the project so that once we flip two cards, if it's a match, we'll remove them. And if it's not a match, we'll flip them back down. You're also going to learn about something called optional chaining, which is simply a way to safely call a method or access a property of an optional type that may be nil. All right, so let's do this. All right, so we're going to implement the logic for the game. And just to remind you how it works, the first time you flip a card, nothing happens, it just flips. And you're going to have to flip a second card to determine if the two cards match. Now, if it's like that and they don't match, then there's going to be a little bit of a delay so the user can see that they in fact did not match. And then you have to flip over another two cards to see if they match. If you do find a match, the two cards that match disappear, leaving empty spaces where the cards were. So let's go into our code and implement this sort of logic. If we scroll back down to the did select item, if you think about it, we need to determine if the user has flipped over a card already. When they tap on a cell, we need to know, is this the first card they flipped over or is it the second card that they flipped over? So we need a property up here to keep track of the first card that was flipped over. So why don't we create one here and we just call it first flipped card, and we'll make this a type of index path because that is what the collection view gives us when the user selects a cell, and we're going to make it optional. So if it's nil, that means it's the first card that was flipped, and then we'll just set this property. When you're flipping over another card, we're going to check this property. If it's nil, that means it's the first card. If it's not nil and it does contain an index path, that means it's the second card that was flipped over. So let's scroll down to here. And in the did select item at method, we're going to have to change some of our logic. If the card has not been flipped over yet, before we flip the card, or actually we would flip the card in either case, but we need to determine if it's the first card or second card that is flipped over. So we can say if first flipped card is nil, meaning that this is the first card being flipped, we are going to set first card or first flipped card equal to the index path that was passed in. Else, this is the second card being flipped. We need to put a to-do here to perform the matching logic. Okay, so let me just add some white space here so that we can more easily read these comments. So you know how before we had, not capital I index path, I want to return the index path parameter, so it's lowercase index path. You know how before we had this if statement to determine if the card was flipped over first, and if it wasn't flipped over, we would flip it. However, if it was already flipped over, we'd flip it back. Well, this part was just for fun. Because in a true match game, you're not allowed to flip cards back over by yourself. You have to reveal two cards, and if they don't match, then both of them get flipped back. You don't get to tap on a card to flip it back. So we're just going to erase this chunk of code right here. So the user can only flip cards over to reveal them. And at this point, the logic that we have is if the card hasn't been flipped yet, we will flip it, and then we'll set the status of the card, and then we will determine if it's the first or the second card that has been flipped over. If it's the first one, then we are simply going to keep track of the index path, and if it is the second card, we are going to do some matching here. So instead of performing the matching logic right here, I am actually going to create a separate method to do the matching logic because it's going to end up being quite long, and we want to add the method after this did select item method, but you have to be careful where the brackets lie, because you don't want to accidentally declare a method inside of another method. So this last bracket, we know that this is for ending of the view controller class. And this next one is going to be end the did select item at method. So we actually want to declare right here. We can create a different section. So if we pull this down, we're going to see even this keyword right here, to do, it actually puts it in this short list. So you can see if you leave yourself little to-do messages, you'll see them here. So we have the UI collection view protocol methods, which are these three. And then we just create a new section for the game logic methods. So right here is going to be check for matches. And what we're going to pass in is actually the second flipped card index, or just call it, index. And this is going to be a type of index path. Now, just to stay consistent, let me just open up these brackets first. Now, just to stay consistent with my naming, you see how this property is called first flipped card, and then I named this parameter second flipped card index. I want to change this property name to also contain the word index. So I'm going to scroll all the way up here and change that property name to contain index. I'm going to press Command B. I know things will break because I just changed the property name, so I need to go back here and update these to also add the word index. All right, so we should be good now. Check for matches. What we're going to do is get the cells for the two cards that were revealed, get the cards for the two cards that were revealed. Okay, sounds a little off, but you'll see what I mean in a second. Let card one cell equal to, and we did this before using the cell for item at, and we pass in the index path, right? So the first card, we are going to use the property first flipped card index, right? And we're going to try to cast it as a card collection view cell. And I'm going to use this question mark one because as I was building this, there were some cases where it could not find the cell for this index path, and I will reveal why later on in the lesson. So this first flipped card index is an optional. So that's what this is complaining about. Because it's an optional, we need to unwrap the optional to get at the value inside. Now, this could contain nil or could actually contain the index path for the first flipped card. I'm pretty confident that it does. I'm going to put an exclamation mark there. If it does become a problem where sometimes this might be nil, then we will check it before trying to use it. But the idea is when I'm coding this app, I would only call check for matches if it's the second card that has been flipped over. So in that case, there should be something set for this property right here, first flipped card index. All right, so let card to cell equals collection view dot cell for item at, and this one is going to be second flipped card index. Again, I'm going to optionally cast it as a card collection view cell. Okay, and now we're going to get the actual cards that those two flipped over cells represent. So card one equals card array first flipped card index. I'm going to unwrap it like that again, and I'm going to let card 2 equal the second flipped card index. Actually, I need to do dot row. Sorry, this would be dot row as well, because the row property of the index path contains the actual index of the cell. So all of these warnings are basically just saying that we declared all of these constants, but we're not really using the constants anywhere. Lil does Xcode. No, we are just about to use it. Compare the two cards. So what we're going to do in order to determine a match is we are going to take the image names of the two cards and we are going to compare them. If they're the same, it's a match. And if it is a match, then we want to set the status of the cards, set the statuses of the cards, and also to remove the cards from the grid. Else, if they don't match, it's not a match. We are going to set the statuses of the cards, and we're going to flip both cards back. And then at the end of the day, whether they are a match or not, we need to reset the first flipped card index back to nil so that we can repeat the process and start all over. Basically, let the user flip two cards over again. So we need to reset this little property here. Okay, so it's a match. We're going to set the, let's see what that says there. Cannot call value of non-function type string. Let's take a look at the cards. Image name. Oh, I forgot the if statement here. There we go. We're doing a comparison and we need this if here. That's what the issue is. So we're going to set the statuses of the card if it's a match. So if card 1 is a match, we're just going to say that is matched is true. Card 2 is matched is also true. Remove the cards from the grid. We actually don't have a method for removing the cell. So we're going to go to card collection view cell here. We have a flip, we have a flip back. We're going to create a new method here called remove. And this one removes both image views from being visible. So I'm going to put a to do, animate it, but for now I am simply going to set the alpha to 0, and setting the alpha to 0 is just going to make them invisible. So alpha is kind of like opacity. It basically goes from 0 to 1. So I'm setting the opacity for both the back and the front image views to 0. So that's going to make them both invisible. So back here in the view controller, if it is a match, we're going to set the status of the card objects, and we are also going to set card 1 cell, and I am going to put a question mark here, dot remove. And just to remind you about what that is, this is called optional chaining. So if card 1 cell turns out to be nil, it is not going to call this method. However, if there is an actual object in this optional, then it will call remove. Card 2 cell with a capital C. And that's just a way to protect ourselves from crashes, because as you can see up here, in card 1 cell, this constant, I am assigning into it, I'm trying to get the cell for this index path from the collection view, and then I'm trying to cast it as a card collection view cell. If something goes wrong in this statement, it's going to assign nil to card 1 cell. Same thing goes for this statement right here. If it can't find the cell for this index path, or it can't cast it as this type, then it's going to set nil into card 2 cell. And if I don't do this, if I don't use the question mark and I just unwrap it and try to call remove, if it's nil, it's going to crash. So by using optional chaining like this, it's a safe way to try to call this method. If it happens that card 1 cell is nil, then it just will stop there. It won't call remove, and things won't crash. Okay, so now let's set the other possibility. If the cards are not a match, then we are going to set the status of the card. We're going to say card1.isFlipped is false because we're going to flip them both back. Card2.isFlipped is also false, and we are going to call flip back on card 1 cell and card 2 cell. The thing is, again, it might be nil, and actually Xcode automatically inserted this question mark for me. Let's try that again. Dot flip back. Oh, that's pretty cool. So yeah, it understands that card 1 cell and card 2 cell may be nil, so it just automatically put this question mark here. I'm doing optional chaining just in case flip back may be called on a nil. And this flip back, there's no delay, so in fact this is going to happen super duper fast, and we might not even see that it's not a match. So let us address that. I don't know if you knew this, but if you right click on a method, you can jump to definition and jump directly to that method. So here we have the transition from front going to back, just basically flipping it back over. And if we want to put a delay on that, there's a very easy way to do that. It's called dispatch queue. And this dispatch queue, it manages the execution of work items. Each work item submitted to a queue is processed on a pool of threads managed by the system. In short, think of it as almost like a conveyor belt of tasks. So what we're going to do is we can actually, and there is a particular method called async after, which we're going to use. So this one has a deadline, which is a dispatch time. We're just basically going to take the current time plus half a second to create half a second of a delay. And inside this second parameter, we can put the block of code to execute after that delay. So for this deadline parameter, we have to specify a dispatch time, which is another class. The handy thing about this class is that it has a type method called now, and that basically returns the current time or current system time, and then we can basically take that and add half a second to it. Now in this execute parameter, we can just double click it to open up a block of code, and we can just take this whole chunk, basically our animation, and we can paste it in there, and that should be okay. Okay, so inside a block of code that you pass in as a parameter, we have to be more explicit about what these are referring to. And so you need to put self in front of these properties to indicate that they are properties of the card collection view cell. And Xcode is going to remind you of that anyways if you forget. So I think at this point, we are ready to run our project. All right, let's try it out. Oh, we are not ready yet, because in the view controller, when the user selects a cell right here, if it's the second card being flipped, we forgot to call our check for matches function, and we're going to pass in the index path. All right, let us run the project now. So first card, and I'm going to select the second card. I know this one is not a match because we haven't really randomized the cards yet. This is great for testing. So did you see that? If that was too fast, we can make the delay for the flip back method a little longer. But however, if it's a match, let's see if they get removed. Okay, there we go. They get removed so fast that we can also add a little animation to that. You see that? However, if you flip over a card that doesn't match, both of them get flipped back over. All right, so let's work on, in the card collection view cell, let's work on the remove method, right? We want to animate it. And actually, it's going to be pretty easy to do that. So this is We actually don't have to animate the back image view because that's behind the front one anyways. So let's just set that alpha to 0 right away. And we simply want to animate it using a type method of the UI view called animate. We want to use this particular one that has a delay parameter. So the time interval, let's just say that it's going to be 0.3. Delay is 0.5, same delay as we have for the flip back here. The options, we can press dot here and we can choose an option. Curve ease out causes the animation to begin quickly and then slow down as it completes. So we're going to choose that one. Animations, we are going to double click that. It's going to open up a code block for us. Inside this code block, inside these curly brackets, we are just going to cut and paste that piece of code in there, which is basically setting the front image view to alpha 0. And for this completion parameter, basically code to run when the animation is complete, we're going to put nil because we don't have any code to run when the animation is done. So here Xcode is telling us again, because this code is inside a block, or it's actually called a closure, and you'll learn more about that. And it's being passed in as a parameter. We have to be more explicit about what front image view is pertaining to. And by adding self here, you're telling it that it's a property of this card collection view cell. All right, so I think that will give us the desired effect. So let's run it again and test it out. If I tap on that, that's cool. You can see it both fade out. You have a little bit of time to see that they are a match. If they are not a match, they're going to flip back over. So before we end the lesson, there are still actually a couple of things we still need to do. So for example, if I flip over 2 cards and they're matched, I need to make it so that I can't tap on these cards anymore. And it looks like I can't, but actually I probably am flipping them over, because in this did select item function, right, when the user taps on a cell, we are only checking the is flipped property. We also need to check that the card hasn't been matched yet, because if it's already matched, then we shouldn't be doing anything with that card, right, even if they're trying to tap on it. So we're going to add an AND parameter here, and we're also going to say if is matched is also false. Only then do we want to allow the card to be flipped over. And remember how I told you that the cells get reused? Well, there is also some weird behavior here. So you can see how these 2 cells are matched, right? When I scroll them out of view, they're going to be reused for something down here. Now, when I scroll up again, and these cells at the bottom row are now out of view and they may be reused, I scroll all the way up and it needs to display, these 2 cells up here. You can see that there's a card here. I thought we matched this, right? The reason for this is because in our card collection view cell, in the set card method, we are not considering if the card has been matched already or not. We are only determining if the card is flipped up or flipped down, right? So we also need to determine if the card has been matched already. So let's add an if statement here. So if the card is matched is true, then what we can say is simply back image view.alpha should be 0, and front image alpha should also be 0. And then we can just use the return keyword right here, and it's going to exit the method, and it's not going to run any of this code down here. However, if the card isn't matched yet, then it's not going to run this code, and it's going to continue on running the rest of this stuff. So let's give that a try. So if we match these 2 and we scroll all the way down, we scroll all the way up, they will stay like that. Oh, and that card actually disappeared. we actually need to do the reverse here, because what happened is that in displaying this cell, it reused one of the cells that was matched before. So we actually have to copy that, paste it there, and set that alpha to be 1. Like that. So if the card is matched already, then we want to make both those image views invisible, and then we exit out of the method. Otherwise, we want to make them visible. So we should comment that. But let's just test this out first. Okay, so let's add some code here. If the card has been matched, then make the image views invisible. If the card hasn't been matched, then make the image views visible. Okay, now there's one more issue that we need to address. Let us go to the card model, because it's easier to demonstrate if there are not so many different types of cards. I'm actually going to change this arc for random from 13 plus 1 to just 0 plus 1, and just to get all of the cards to be the same. Alright, so all of them should be the same. Okay, cool. So the problem is, if I, let's say, tap on this card right here, and I go down and I tap on this card, and I go up, you see that this was still visible even though I matched it with this card down here, right? And I scroll back up and it's gone. So what is happening there? Let's see if I can repeat it. This one is a little harder to catch because it doesn't always happen, and it has to do with how the collection view reuses cells again. So I just matched it with this one, right? This happened again. So this one should have disappeared, but it didn't. So what's going on with this? So what's happening is when the user taps on the first card, we keep track of the index path with the first card flipped index property. And this is something that we declared at the top of the view controller class, if you remember. It basically keeps track of the first card we flipped. Now, when the user scrolls all the way to the bottom of the collection view and they flip over the second card, there may be a possibility that the collection view recycled that cell of the first flipped over card, and it basically used it, it took it, and it used it for another cell that we are looking at now on the screen. So when the user flips over that second card and we determine that it's a match, we call the remove method on both of the flipped over cells, except the problem is the cell that represented that first card has been recycled and is no longer there. Well, you might ask, why doesn't our app crash then? Well, the reason is because we used optional chaining when we called the remove method. If you remember, we called card1 cell $.remove and card2 cell $.remove. So it removed the second card because that was a valid cell, but we were never able to get the cell that represented card1. So we couldn't call the remove method on that cell. So when we scroll all the way up and it displays that cell, it hasn't been removed. And how we're going to solve this problem is we're going to force the collection view to reload this particular cell. And it's actually got a function or a method to do that. Let's go back to the view controller. Inside the check for matches method, at the end right here, we are going to tell the collection view to reload the cell of the first card if it is nil. Okay, so we're going to say if card1 cell is nil, then we're going to call collection view dot reload items at, and this one reloads just the items at the specified index paths. And you have to put the index paths into an array, even though we only have one that we want to reload. We're going to reload the first flipped card index, and I'm going to unwrap it with an exclamation mark, because when we call check for matches, we only call it after this has been set anyways, because we only call this when the second card is flipped. And while we're here, let's write a comment here. Reset the property that tracks the first card flipped. All right, so this should solve the problem that we are experiencing. Let's refresh the app, or run the project again, I mean. Okay, so we're gonna tap on that, scroll down, tap on this, it's a match, and we're gonna scroll back up, it's gone. We can do the same. And I can safely say that I think the problem is solved. As you can see, before we implemented that line of code, we were seeing it happen 2 for 2. But I am, this is like the 5th match and it's not happening. So it's good. Now the last thing to do is just to change the card model back so it randomizes between all of the different cards. Okay, so let's run the app again just to make sure that we're getting different cards. All right. Okay, so that's where we're going to end off in this lesson. It's looking pretty good, isn't it? In this lesson, you got more practice with functions, if statements, and a lot more. You also learned about how to delay the execution of code. I just want to remind you that if you're serious about learning how to build apps, you should be trying to build this on your own computer if possible. Don't worry if you're making typos, if you keep having to refer back to the video or the cheat sheet for syntax or keywords or things like that. This is completely natural. Over time, if you continue typing this stuff out, you'll automatically remember all of the keywords in the syntax. I must have typed out thousands of if statements by now. It's just the best way to learn. In the comment section below, let me know if you're typing this out and trying this out on your own computer or not. And finally, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. And if you don't want to miss the next video, hit that bell icon as well. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.